recently about social media gone wrong, using excerpts from Craig Rochelle's book entitled #Struggles. Well, in that same book, Craig talked about a subject that sadly is an epidemic in today's society. Craig says he's living proof that what kids have been saying for generations is true, that you'll never again use all that math you learned in high school. Well, actually, that's not entirely true, he says, because if you have kids of your own, that's when it comes to bite you. They need help with their homework, or worse, if you're homeschooling them, you have to know what you're talking about. Craig said you haven't known panic until your daughter asked, "Dad, what's the order of operation for a polynomial equation with exponents?" What in the world? As tempting as it is to tell kids to look online or just use their smartphone calculator out, he said he usually digs in and tries to remember Mrs. Simpson's math class from his junior year. It's not that he doesn't want them to rely on technology to find the answers. Isn't that still called cheating, though? But he did learn one thing in math clearly on that stuck with him, and that's the definition of integer, I-N-T-E-G-E-R. You might remember it as well. In math, an integer is simply a whole number, one that can be expressed without a fractional component. The word itself comes from a Latin word that is spelled the same way and means whole or complete. This is the same root word from which we get the word integrity. An important word that gets thrown around a lot as something everyone wants to have or at least to be known for. However, practicing the habits of integrity, doing the things that keep us whole and completely focused on God, has taken a huge hit, thanks to how much we interact with technology. It's not easy to keep our character healthy and our heart pure when hundreds, if not thousands, of temptations are just a click away. If integrity is who you are when no one is looking, then you'll probably agree that it's easier to do the right thing when you know others are watching. When we believe that no one will know, it's much more tempting to do what we want, regardless of what's right. And therein lies one of the biggest challenges with social media and technology. It's easy to believe that what we do in front of our screens is secret, although that's debatable whether it's really true. After all, if we delete our history, clear our cache, and clean out our cookies, it's easy to believe that no one will ever know what we do online. No one will know what articles we read, what ads we click on, what site we surf, what videos we watch, or what pictures we enjoy. Craig said that maybe it's just because he's a guy, but says he immediately thinks about how technology affects our integrity by tempting us sexually. And while our sexuality is certainly a huge part of our integrity and an issue with which many men struggle, in fact, studies show 1 in 2 guys have looked at porn today, Craig also realized that our integrity encompasses 2 other important areas: our convictions and our internal peace. These 3 areas overlap, as do many personal areas influenced by technology, but it may be helpful to consider each one separately. Let's start with lust. The author said that when he was a kid, it was difficult to find a picture of a naked woman. To see some skin, you really didn't have many options. If your dad didn't have a secret stash of girly magazines, your best bet was to have a buddy whose dad did, and that was his path to porn. In 5th grade, his best friend discovered a big stack of Playboys hidden in a trunk with a lock that was supposed to keep out prying eyes. What his dad didn't realize was that virtually no lock on earth can keep out curious 11-year-old boys. To this day, he said he remembers the rush of curiosity and the thrill of discovery as they turned page after page. He said he distinctly remembers studying Miss February as if he were cramming for an exam where his very life depended on remembering every minute detail. For several weeks, his friend and he spent every possible after-school hour hidden in his closet, looking and learning and lusting. This exposure may seem benign by today's standard, but I promise you it wasn't. He writes, now more than 3 decades later, if he really tries, he says he can still recall some of those images that he burned into the hard drive of his brain. Thankfully, besides those hours in his friend's closet with his dad's stash, he saw little growing up that would further pollute his eager-to-be-tarnished mind. Later, when he was in high school and college, the invention of the VCR, remember those, hooked many of his friends into regularly viewing hardcore porn. Somehow those years, fortunately, he managed to steer clear of those habits. He said it wasn't until after he was married and they got their first internet connection that he discovered the availability of this once hidden temptation. You might be too young to remember this, but instead of Wi-Fi, we once used what was called the dial-up modem to access the internet through a phone line. Anyone who endured this season of technology will never forget that annoying sound of that modem trying to connect. It was like this rotary dial phone fighting with some dying cat while aliens shot missiles at a water buffalo scratching its horns on a chalkboard. That's what it sounded like. Craig said he will never forget the moment that he was sitting by his wife Amy reading their first few emails on their free AOL trial account. In total innocence, they clicked on this email from someone they didn't know. And he said what we saw next was unlike anything we had ever seen. Even as a pastor with a keen awareness of the sexual depravity in this world, I was so repulsed by those images that I felt nauseated. He said, I didn't have the experience to know how to click and delete, so like a ninja, instinctively chopping for the kill, I slapped the power switch off and just turned the whole system off, he said. Suddenly, the virtual world had shifted beneath the weight of that monitor. The device he had used primarily as a word processor, because for the most part, that's what PCs were back then, became a new and unexpected portal to temptation. I mean, if that kind of gross stuff we saw was online, then surely Miss February and her sister from the rest of the year had to be on there somewhere too, Craig thought. For the first time in his life, he said he realized that everything he had ever wanted to see as a curious boy, and everything that he needed to avoid as a Christian, was right there at his fingertips. Again, by the grace of God, Craig said he learned to set up some systems to shore up his defenses against the temptation. But many, and probably even most of his friends, didn't. Images that had once been difficult to find were now constantly within reach, just a click away. An entire generation has now grown up with easy access to porn. It's as simple to find as a new recipe for enchiladas. You can do your banking online, play games online, read the news online, and research the best hotels in the capital of Algeria. You can also view pornography, unlimited, unfiltered, ungodly images of men and women in graphic situations that make dogs in heat look like a scene from a Jane Austen novel. There's something for virtually every lustful desire, fetish, perversion, or form of sexual affection. And an alarming number of people seem to be visiting this online carnal cafeteria to fuel their lustful desires. Studies actually indicate that 70% of men aged 18 to 24 visit porn sites any given month. Just let that sink in for a moment. Think about young men you know and care about. Almost 3 out of every 4 of them are regularly consuming a diet of destructive, dehumanizing scenes. We can only imagine how an entire generation's minds are being affected. For years, people thought porn was strictly a man's problem, but that's clearly no longer the case. Now 1 in 3 porn users are women, and they're quickly catching up to the number of male users. According to one source, 34% of church-going women admit to visiting porn sites online. If you're watching this video, you might be inclined to share these concerns as well, but if you think we might be overreacting, just consider that the highest percentage of consumers of pornography is children aged 12 to 17. And these kids aren't just viewing. More than 1 in 5 teenage girls say that they have posted nude or semi-nude photos of themselves online. These numbers don't even scratch the surface of what's happening on services like Snapchat or Tumblr. As if all this weren't enough, it's not just looking and lusting that is getting people into trouble. Simply connecting or reconnecting with new friends or old flames through social media is a massive source of temptation for many. More and more studies are correlating the use of social media with higher rates of marital infidelity. Here is some of the evidence. Previous studies also support the conclusion that there's a connection between social networking and marital problems. Adjusting for other variables, 32% of heavy social media users say they've thought seriously about leaving their spouse, compared with 16% of people who don't use social networks, according to a 2011 University of Texas at Austin survey of 1,600 married 18 to 39-year-olds. This is one of the few, if not only publicly available, representative surveys in the United States that contains questions about both social network use and indicator of marriage well-being. 1/3 of divorce filings in the UK contain the word Facebook, a separate 2011 survey by Divorce Online, a legal website that was found. It would be unfair to blame Facebook and other social media sites or technology for adulterous affairs. Facebook doesn't make people cheat, people decide to cheat. But we have access to many opportunities online that without accountability can turn technological blessings into curses. Craig Rochelle said when he first started writing Christian books, he wouldn't have even bothered to waste words explaining why looking lustfully at erotic images is wrong. Almost everyone pursuing God would have agreed that looking at images or videos that stir lustful thoughts or actions is unquestionably immoral. Well, not so today, which brings me to the second point of attack on our integrity. Over time and with repeated use, technology is eroding both our moral beliefs and our commitment to acting on what we believe. According to one study, roughly 2/3, 67% of young adult men and 50%, or actually 49% of young adult women now believe that viewing pornography is acceptable. In one short decade, the standards of what is perceived as right and wrong have unequivocally changed, perhaps faster than any other time in history. Now, even faithful church attendees push back and ask, what's the big deal if I just look? It's no one else's business. I'm not hurting anyone. Some Christians have even asked, isn't looking at porn better than going out and sinning with another person? No. Sin is sin, whether it happens in our minds or our hearts or by using our bodies. Obviously, the consequences of our sin vary according to the actions, but many people are convincing themselves that looking at porn has no consequences and that it doesn't hurt anyone else. But that's simply not true. What used to be considered wrong has gradually become tolerated and eventually simply accepted by many, if not most. For example, Craig said he clicked on a new link from a tweet earlier today to read about a crisis in the Middle East. At the bottom of the page were ads from other unrelated articles that you could click on and read. And to be honest, he said the images didn't shock him. He said he sees similar ads several times a week on similar respected news sites. But what has become normal, if viewed from a distance, is anything but normal. Right there in front of him was a barely dressed blonde woman. She managed to cover the parts that would make the picture unacceptable, while accentuating the features that were certain to draw attention. Right next to that image was a naked couple in bed. Sure, their essentials were carefully, though barely, covered by the sheets, but there wasn't much left to the imagination. The article, if you could call it that, was seductively entitled, 7 Ways to Drive Your Lover Mad in Bed. Notice that it doesn't promise 7 ways to please your spouse, but your lover. Times have changed, but that doesn't mean morality should. While all this sexy stuff may be normal, that doesn't make it right. No matter how much our culture tries to normalize what God calls sin, because becoming normal doesn't make wrong right. The Apostle Paul says it directly. But among you, he said, there must not be even a hint of sexual immorality or any kind of impurity or greed, because these are improper for God's holy people. That's Ephesians 5:3. Not even a hint, he said. I'm sure you know what a hint is, but let's play a little game. I'll give you some examples, and you tell me if they include a hint of sexual immorality. We'll start with easy questions and move on to less obvious ones. If someone posts a sexually explicit picture, is this a hint of immorality? Of course it is. But that one's too easy. What about a suggestive ad with an image of a barely dressed person? Hint or not? Years ago, teenage boys from Craig's youth group confessed that they lusted after department store newspaper ads of models just wearing bras and panties. If those can create lust, surely more suggestive ads will, if not more. What about a raunchy tweet or a dirty joke posted on Facebook? Again, to God, that would qualify as more than a hint. How about pinning a nearly nude Ryan Gosling meme on Pinterest? No matter how good he looks, that still would fall squarely into God's inappropriate zone. You might be tempted to write me off as a religious fuddy-duddy. That's totally fine. If you don't strive to know and follow Jesus, then fair enough. That's your choice. But if you want to live in a way that honors our Savior, if you want to follow Jesus in a sin-saturated, selfie-centered world, then you'll have to be different. Seriously, not even a hint. Our convictions must be guided by God's timeless principles, not by the ever-eroding popular opinion on whatever happens to be acceptable now. We must stand firm in our faith, fighting the battle against the temptations and sinful habits that our enemy gladly uses to pull us away from knowing God and loving others. If we want our hearts to remain intact and whole, not stained by lust and haunted by impure images, then we must set limits on what we access with technology or otherwise. This may sound unlikely at best or impossible at worst, but I want to encourage you to believe that God wouldn't ask you to do something without giving you the power to do it. If you're struggling right now in this area, whether seriously or occasionally, or if you just want to better purify your use of technology, keep listening. With God, all things are possible, and He gives the power to swim against the cultural current of our hyper-sexualized society. If we're going to follow Christ with integrity, we must use technology wisely. The Bible is more than clear that we are deceiving ourselves if we think we can flirt with lust and not contribute to our soul's destruction. Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, warned his son of the temptation of following the wrong type of woman. He said in Proverbs 5:8, keep a path far from her. Do not go near the door of her house. He didn't say you can look but don't touch. Or here, son, make sure you wear some protection. No, Solomon essentially shouted, are you crazy? Stay away. Don't even go close to the edge of sin. Oddly, in our culture, many people want to do just the opposite, to see how close they can get to trouble without crossing the line. I know I have been there. Thank God for His mercy, His grace, His forgiveness. I have learned that God's Word teaches us to stay away, as far away from temptation as possible. I love the way David phrases this idea in Psalm 16:6, where he says, the boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. God has put some fences or boundaries in place, and I'm very thankful He has. The fences keep the good stuff in and the bad stuff out. His boundaries are designed not to confine me, but to protect me. Think about it. Most people I know don't plan to ruin their lives. I don't know anyone who thinks, if I can connect with an old boyfriend on Facebook, I can totally wreck my life. I can almost guarantee an ugly divorce full of expensive attorneys helping me fight over custody rights for the kids. I can devastate my husband and drop a nuclear bomb of pain into my kids' lives. And I can spend the next 5 years of my life trying to forgive myself, rebuild my life, and regain my name. No one plans like that, but these things actually happen every day. The same with pornography. I don't know a single man who wanted to crush the wife he loves when he discovered his little secret. But one glance, followed by another click, often leads to an addiction that seems impossible to overcome. So if you're going to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, you'll have to be deliberate about protecting your heart, mind, and soul. To follow Jesus in this selfie-centered world, lust-filled world, you'll be wise to set up some online boundaries to keep yourself safe. Before temptation can reach you, find ways to push it further away. Craig says he's far from perfect, but let me share with you the defense that he wrote about, that he set up to keep himself safe. These safeguards are pleasant boundaries, he said to him. Instead of hoping that he has the strength to get out of trouble when temptation knocks, he's decided to do his best to keep temptation from ever getting close to his front door. Craig writes, as I tell you what to do, remember, these are for me. Knowing his weaknesses and vulnerabilities, Craig said he decided to eliminate all temptation that he could think of on his computer by using a tracking software that sends a detailed and scored list of every single click he makes. Every single click. This software sends a weekly report to 2 different men, both of whom have the authority to remove him from his role as pastor. He said if he didn't have this boundary in place, there might be times he'd find himself vulnerable on a computer because years ago he shut that door, slammed it, nailed it, bolted it shut. Now that he has no access, he's never tempted. He no longer has the option to jump over the edge into an abyss that would wreck his heart, destroy his marriage, and undermine his calling. These are 3 of many reasons that boundaries are pleasant, necessary, and freeing to him. Now that the author has been open with you, it's your turn. To help with the process, he asks you some questions. To increase your odds of living with online integrity, you have to start by telling the truth. Where are you weak? Where are you vulnerable? Where are you most likely to get caught in a trap that could destroy what you treasure most? Now is an important moment. Be truthful. You are only as strong as you are honest. I want you to pause for a moment and think about when you're the most vulnerable. Maybe it's when you travel. You're away from home, working hard, feeling lonely, and temptation strikes. Perhaps it's when you're bored. Without much happening on a Sunday afternoon, your mind starts to wander. You're playing on social media. A few clicks later, you end up somewhere you shouldn't be. Maybe you're easily distracted when you're angry or anxious or overwhelmed. When you're not feeling good about things, you may realize you're more vulnerable than in your healthier moments. You may be tempted by trouble when your spouse is out of town. You don't have as much to do and trouble seems to just find you. Or perhaps you're vulnerable when you're looking for something to watch on Netflix or you're innocently browsing Instagram. You start out well, but you end up bad again. Maybe it's gotten even worse for you. Perhaps you've crossed some lower barriers a long time ago, and now you're looking almost daily at things that are dangerous to your faith and poisonous to your soul. Maybe you've sent or you've received some inappropriate pics or texts. Be honest. You're only as strong as you are honest, remember? Once you've determined your most vulnerable points, you'll want to put up some boundaries. If you don't have a strong wall of defense, build one. If you have some vulnerable spots in what used to be a wall, close those gaps and eliminate the obvious access points. If you're even remotely tempted or you think you might be vulnerable, plan today to stay out of trouble tomorrow. Chances are you might not be tempted by everything I've suggested. You might already know of other ways to protect yourself from troubling habits or inclinations. Be honest with yourself and do everything you can to put protective measures in place. If you might be tempted to watch questionable YouTube videos, delete the app. If your device won't let you delete it, use a locking app with a code that only one of your accountability partners has. No parody blog or cat video is worth being vulnerable. If you're constantly getting into trouble on your smart TV, find appropriate ways to block that source. But if you can't, trade in your smart device for a dumb one. Yes, I'm dead serious. Same with social media. If you find yourself revisiting people, sites, pictures, or videos that hurt your relationship with God, the purity of your mind, and the intimacy between you and your spouse or future spouse, drop that social media. Before you shut down this video and start tweeting hateful things about me or the author, pause and give what I'm saying some thought. If you aren't a Christian, you don't have to worry about anything here. But if you truly want to honor God, living by His Holy Spirit, to avoid even a hint of sexual immorality, then lose it. Believe it or not, people before us lived for centuries without the ability to spray their thoughts in 140 characters or less to a group of people who are barely paying attention anyway because they're more concerned about what they're going to say next. No retweets, comments, or likes are worth the poison that will contaminate your soul and hurt your relationships with people that you love the most. Not even a hint. But let's not stop there. Since we're going crazy in pursuing online purity, if you're married, let me suggest that you give your spouse access to all your passwords. After all, we shouldn't have any secrets from our spouse, should we? If we have nothing to hide, why not give him or her full access? Or better yet, you might even consider sharing accounts when possible. I know many couples who have shared a Facebook account and love that they never have to worry about what their loved one is doing or saying. You might make some personal rules as well. Maybe you won't text or direct message the opposite sex unless it's mandatory for business purposes. Or under no circumstances will you share personal information or imply anything that would be questionable. So give it some thought. Where are you weak or vulnerable? And what are you going to do about it? When you think about it, no one stumbles into righteousness, but people fall into sin every day. But no one just falls into holiness. It requires making deliberate, prayerful choices and walking an intentional path, which brings us to the third stress point where technology often destroys our integrity. It robs us of our peace. Peace is a funny thing. We tend to think of it as the absence of conflict, the period between wars and military battles where opposing sides at least pretend to get along. Doesn't that remind you of some marriages? Whether it's the peace and quiet longed for by a stay-at-home mom with young children or something negotiated among world's political leaders, we all tend to think of peace as this quiet, calm, serene state of being. But in the Jewish culture, the word for peace, shalom, has a much richer, fuller meaning than just getting along with everyone. In fact, shalom is one of the underlying principles of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible that Jews consider foundational to their history. Shalom means not only the kind of personal peace we often crave, but also a harmonious environment and a sense that everything's right with the world. Shalom is about living out the fullness of God who created you to be and enjoy the abundance of blessings that God showers on you. This kind of peace includes a feeling of confidence and blessing because you know who you are and what you're supposed to be doing. It also encompasses a sense of security and an ability to relax and not have to try to control everything because you're able to trust in God's goodness as well as His plan. What's interesting is that peace, shalom, cannot be earned like a paycheck after a week's work. It comes as a free gift if you're just willing to receive it. We all say we want more peace, but I wonder if we recognize what we do that often robs us of God's given peace. Like checking our emails obsessively because we're afraid we'll miss something when we could be enjoying time with God, our family, or a close friend that we've been missing. Or like responding to an email just to make sure everyone views us as the hard-working, super efficient people we are when we should be focusing on more important priorities. Like killing time surfing for an hour or so because we're avoiding a difficult conversation. Or like obsessing over the latest hot-out game when we should be playing with our kids. Like numbing the pain in our life by clicking to the wrong sites for a lustful escape from reality. Here's what many people miss. When we misuse technology, we're robbing ourselves of the peace that we so desperately crave, because even the momentary escape is followed by waves of intense guilt. We want to numb the pain, but on the other side of our binge, the pain is still there, only worse. We love the momentary distraction, but then reality screams at us and our responsibilities pile up. We love the thrill of the lust, but the fear of getting caught haunts us and robs us of sleep and peace. Like a person dying of thirst who gulps salt water, that which is supposed to satisfy only intensifies our need. So life goes on as usual. More stress, more anxiety, more worries, and less peace. Everyone talks about being so busy and longing for more rest, but not many of us are willing to guard our integrity by unplugging and protecting our personal peace. One way to measure that peace in your life is to think about your level of satisfaction and contentment. Are you always striving for more, trying to keep up with your Facebook friends and Twitter followers? Or can you appreciate the enormous blessings you've enjoyed today? A bed to sleep in, food to eat, a family to love, friends to enjoy, a car to drive, and a job that provides income? I'm convinced that our peace, or the absence thereof, is directly tied to what we focus on each day. We don't need a lot of specialized knowledge or superhuman will to achieve peace. We simply need to keep paying attention to what we're doing with our time. If we're focused on escaping the pain of life, avoiding problems, and trying to control our image to the rest of the world, then we won't have much peace. And the more we seek to surf porn or feed a shopping or gambling addiction online or envy others for all that they appear to have online, the more miserable, restless, and anxious we're going to feel. Guaranteed. The Bible is quite clear about how we can cultivate and enjoy God's peace as well as how we can lose it. When we worry and fret over what we don't have, what we wish we had, what someone else thinks of us, or how jealous we are of others, inner peace remains elusive. Scripture tells us worry weighs a person down. An encouraging word cheers a person up. Proverbs 12:25. Whenever technology increases our worry, whenever it helps us fragment our attention and compartmentalize our hearts, it also kills our peace. We worry when we rely on our own abilities rather than trust in God. But His Word tells us, don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your request to God, and the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Philippians 4:6 and 7. When we lack peace, we live stressed and afraid. We're always wondering when the next problem is going to pop up, or the next conflict will arise, or the next crisis hit. Even when things are good, we hold our breath, constantly expecting that other shoe to drop. It always does, right? It's hard to be wholehearted in our pursuit of God when our thoughts are polluted by worry and anxiety. Instead, we should let the peace of Christ rule in our hearts, since as members of one body, you were called to peace. Colossians 3:15 tells us, and be thankful, it says. Now is a great time to be brutally honest. Are you addicted to something online? Looking lustfully, spending uncontrollably, surfing endlessly, playing continually, gambling consistently, scrolling incessantly? Tell the truth. While it's never going to be fun or easy to kick an online addiction, you'll be surprised how quickly your peace will be restored once you surrender the problem to God. Because if you're serious about pursuing God's healing, He'll meet you wherever you are. So if you find yourself overwhelmed with virtual temptation, remember that God isn't surprised. He knows what you face, and He's already made a plan to help you find freedom. Paul offers us this amazing promise. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you're tempted, He will provide a way out so that you can escape it. 1 Corinthians 10:13. Don't miss the power of these words. God will provide a way out. What's your way out? I don't know. It could be something dramatic, but be honest. You're a sharp person. If some small tweak would have fixed your problem, you would have done it a long time ago. Your way out might be confessing to your spouse, your best friend, your small group, or your support group, or your pastor. It might be deleting an app and making sure you can't get to it again. You might need to lock down your phone, your iPad, your iPod, your Kindle, your computer, TV, and anything else that you can't get to. Anything that you shouldn't be seeing. I don't know what you need to do, but chances are you have a pretty good idea. God promises to give you a way out. James 4:7-8 tells us, submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil and he'll flee from you. Come near to God and he'll come near to you. If you want to be a man or woman of integrity, then maybe it's time for you to submit to God like never before. That's where you start. If you're not yet a Christian, click on the video that says pull the ripcord. Then with Christ's power, you can resist the devil and his temptations. Tragically, so many people do just the opposite. They resist God's promptings and give in to temptations of the evil one. But this won't be you. Make up your mind, and it won't be me. Instead, we will live with our own line integrity intact, because our lives are not about us. We will not gratify the self-centered lust of our flesh because we're born of the Spirit. We'll not allow God's loving truth to slide into the quicksand of popular opinion and sink us into lower standards. We will guard our peace. We won't allow how we use technology to rob us of our purpose, our passion, and power. As we pray, God will give us wisdom to set up pleasant boundaries and safeguards to keep temptation as far away from us as possible. And when we are tempted, we know that Jesus has already given us an escape route. We will seek him, seek his way out, and take it. We have his power to overcome sin. We have his Spirit to lead us into righteousness. We have his presence to keep us pure. We will be whole. We will be complete. We will know the peace of the Lord. Until next time, bye-bye for now.
Jesus is the answer for the world today. Above him there's no other, 'cause Jesus is the way.